Okay, so the things that you want to include in your experience sections, you always want to include the title of the position that you held. Even if you were a general volunteer somewhere, you want to say that you were a general volunteer. You definitely want to include the name and the location of the organization, how long you worked there. It doesn't have to be exact dates, like May 1st in 2005 to June 6th in 2006. You can do seasons. You can also do with the year or the month and the year. You want to, again, like I said before, list things in reverse chronological order. You want to write impact statements, also known as bullet point statements, that talk about what you accomplished on the job, not just a list of job responsibilities. Your job responsibilities might be included, but you want to talk about how you actually did them and what was accomplished through the responsibility. And we'll talk about that in a minute. You want to use past tense action verbs throughout your resume, of course, if it happened in the past, all right? You want to make sure that you're consistent in your formatting. You want to put the most relevant bullet points and information for the position on top. And anytime you can qualify and quantify your experiences, like if you increase sales by 50%, for example, you want to include that. You want to be able to really paint a picture to the employer about what you did and what you accomplished, okay? So those little details are important. And so that's why, again, it's really important to update in your resume as you're in the experiences. So here's some examples of some strong bullet point statements and some experiences for a resume. As I said, we have the name of where the person worked at the Museum of Science, the location in Boston, Mass, the dates from when they were there, their position is listed underneath. And it's not in the past tense because they're currently working there. But as you can see, it's very direct in language. There's no pronouns used. You actually don't use proper English when you're writing a resume. It's much more direct. You don't use pronouns. And then the following section, you have a more past, position happened in 2010. So everything's in the past tense. All right. This is just another example. I like to show students, maybe you had a position here at UMass Boston. You don't want to just list the University of Massachusetts Boston. You want to also list the department that you worked in specifically, as well as the title that you held. Okay. Can I include lab research or any coursework experience? Yes, 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 and yes. A lot of times people think, oh, I didn't get paid to do it, it's just coursework, it's not important, I shouldn't include it on my resume. And that's really false because, like as I mentioned, your education is some of your most relevant experience, that relates to what you want to do. And so it's something that you should really highlight. Faculty members have, wrung their hands at me and said, Amanda, why aren't students putting their coursework on their resumes? And I'm like, well, we're trying to get them to understand that you don't have to just be paid. And sometimes that's all students have, especially if they're applying for an internship for the first time. Maybe they've worked at, a restaurant or in retail, but they haven't worked directly in, a business position, which is what they're actually applying for an internship in. And the coursework that they're doing in those business classes is the most relevant. So those are some things that you want to actually highlight. You can do them in their own heading called related coursework experience or course project experience, or you can just include it under a section that says, if it is for business class, you could list business experience. The key thing is you don't want to use the word professional, because then that alludes to the fact that you were paid for it, and since it's coursework, you obviously weren't paid for it. So things that you want to include in those researching projects, you want to include the name of the research, the dates that you've done it, who was conducted under, as well as the title of the research and the description of the research. If it was a project, you want to include the project title and the dates, and then a description of the project itself. Again, you're not using pronouns, it's very direct in language, but it's a great thing to highlight on your resume. Other categories you can put on your resume: professional development workshops, presentations and publications that you might have, hobbies, interests, and activities. But you want to avoid padding. And like I said, padding is just putting stuff on the resume just to put stuff on to make you, because you think more is better. In a resume, less is actually more sometimes. So when it comes to like hobbies, interests, and activities, for example, it's great if you do yoga. It's great if you run marathons. But unless you're applying to be a yoga instructor or, I'll just keep talking and you guys can see.
It's like they didn't pay the electricity bill.
I know. Well, I'll just keep talking because I haven't changed the slide yet. And then if I go to the next slide. Nothing happened.
Something happened in that room because the projector's not even
On. Yeah, it didn't turn off. There was a light now. Okay, I'm just going to keep talking in the meantime. And they'll try to figure it out. So, for example, if you're applying to a computer science position, and they don't want to necessarily know that you run marathons. But what they would want to know as an interest or a hobby is if you built a computer from scratch from spare parts that you found in a junkyard. Or if you're tutoring the elderly on how to use and work on a computer. Because that's, even though it's not exactly related to the job that you're doing, it's at least relevant to what you are hoping to do. Okay? So that's the difference between just highlighting any old hobby or interest versus one that's more relevant to a position. So, do you guys want me to keep going, or? Please continue. Do you just want me to without the slides? Okay, I'll just keep talking. And luckily, there's not too many examples. Many more examples, but I'll refer you guys to the site where there's examples of resumes that you can look at in the future. So, okay. Other things that you might want to highlight: professional skills that are not soft skills. So perhaps you speak another language, or maybe computer skills. You're not a computer science or an IT person, but you know how to use basic computer skills. You're going to include those in their own heading as well. Again, these are not those soft skills like communication, leadership, all that stuff. Those are things you're going to highlight underneath your experience sections. So you want to do that. Now, community involvement or volunteering. Those experiences, like I said, you can highlight them in your experience headings. And you can also include them in their own heading, just under community involvement in more of a list format. Especially if they're not super relevant to what you want to do, but you want to show that you've been dedicating your time to something else. And so for that, in that case, you would just list the title that you held, like a volunteer, where you did the volunteer work, as well as the dates. Okay, so the heart of your resume are the bullet points that go in the experience, underneath each of the experience sections of your resume. Those are called impact statements. And so to come up with accomplishments to discuss, you really need to ask yourself, what did I do in a job or activity that I was proud of, that I increased the quantity maybe of something of, maybe you solved a problem, what are those accomplishments? Once you identify what your accomplishments are, you want to ask, what did I do to accomplish that task? How did I do it? Why did I do it? And what happened after I did it, okay? And so when you're writing, I really wish I had my slides, because there's, a good formula to show you guys, but when you're highlighting your accomplishments in those bullet point statements, it's important that you have 3 things, okay? You want to make sure that you start your bullet point statement with an action statement, and You then also want to make sure that there's a project or a problem that's highlighted, and then the result that happened because of the action that you took on the project or the problem. If you have those three things in a bullet point statement, then you're going to have a strong bullet point statement that sets you apart from another candidate for a job. So an example of a strong bullet point would sound something like this. Coordinated 3 events to raise funds for a class trip to New York, which raised over $2,500, 20% over the goal. Okay? Coordinated is the action verb that I mentioned, that you start your bullet point statements with. The 3 events is the project or problem that you worked on. And the result is that you raised $2,500, 20% over the goal. Now, the majority of the time when students come into my office and they have examples of their resume with bullet points, usually what they have is just the action verb and the project or the problem, such as, in this case, it would say just coordinated events. And that's okay, but it's not great, because it doesn't differentiate you from any other candidate that's also applying to that same event planning job that's also coordinated events before, right? So that result is really that important part of the bullet point statement that really sets you apart. A result doesn't necessarily have to just be quantitative, like in this case, 25%, $2,500, 20% over the goal. It can be a qualitative result as well. You know, if you improve something, or maybe for example, like maybe you tutored kids after school on, science. So a qualitative result could be that you motivated them to learn, or you furthered their comprehension on the subject matter, okay? So keep that in mind when you're writing a bullet point statement. It's got to have those 3 parts to it. I'm trying to think if there's other things like that. So with your bullet point statements too, you just want to make sure your action verbs are different for each of your bullet point statements, that you're leading each sentence with. So you don't want to say assist, assist, assist over and over again. Even if you did do a lot of assisting in a job, you want to do different action verbs for different bullet point statements, because action verbs represent skills to an employer. And the more skills you have, the more diverse you're going to be to a candidate, okay, in your skill set. So how do you, again, remember what I talked about before, how do you know what skills you want to highlight? You look at that job description and highlight and underline the words that you feel are most relevant, that they're looking for, and you want to find a way, as long as you have those experiences, you don't want to lie, if you don't have them, you can't highlight them. But if you do, you want to put those into your resume. Another thing to keep in mind too is that you don't want your bullet point statements to be too broad. So for example, if you were trying to highlight the fact that you were a volunteer assistant at Brigham and Women's Hospital, okay? And your bullet point maybe you have is that you assisted in the care of patients. That's okay, but it doesn't tell me what you did to assist in the care of the patients. The employers really want you to be specific. You don't want them to have to assume what you did and what you accomplished in your role as a volunteer at Brigham and Women's Hospital. They want to know the nitty-gritty of what you actually did to assist them. So if that's the case, you want to think, well, okay, when I was an assistant, I organized daily social activities in a playroom in order to help patient morale. And I also maintained the cleanliness of 30 rooms during a 4-hour shift, ensuring a safe and healthy environment for the patients. Okay? So it got really specific on what they did to assist in the care of the patients. Okay? And those are the things that an employer really wants to know. And that way you're able to bring in more action statements that also show what you've accomplished. Okay? It doesn't even have to be the tasks that you specifically did too. It can also be, the things that you took part in, such as, perhaps, you attended staff meetings or contributed to staff meetings, or were part of a team and collaborated with the team. Those things can be highlighted as well and are really important to do so. Okay? All right, so a few last tips we are getting close to the end, and also we probably would have had a little more if the slides were working, but since we don't have that. If your resume is 2 pages, you want to add a header that says on the top of your page, the last name, page 2, so that if the if they did print out your resume and they ever got separated, they'd be able to make sure that they knew what that page 2 went to page 1 to, okay? If you're emailing your resume to an employer, which I mean really that's the way we send our resumes now, you want to send it as a PDF version, okay? PDF, it takes a picture of the document, it doesn't, get funky if they would do different version of Microsoft Word or Office. So just make sure that you send it as a PDF version. In the email that you send your document to, you want to write the job title in the subject line of your email. This alerts the recipient to the purpose of your writing and may prevent your message from being filtered for spam. And you want to post your resume online. LinkedIn, I don't know how many of you have a LinkedIn profile. If you don't, you should definitely get one, especially if you're about to go on the job search or you need to build your professional network. 80% of all jobs are gained through networking. Your profile page on LinkedIn, it's your resume. So once you have that document, you want to make sure that you upload it onto LinkedIn. And finally, your resume is really, again, is often the first version of the you that an employer gets. Think about what do you want them to remember about you? What is your personal brand? Because those are the things that you want to highlight on your actual resume. So next steps for you guys, update your resume, call our office, the contact information is on the cards to set up a time to see us. At any time, let us know if you have any questions or need any assistance with your career planning. And that's it. So I can take questions, or I'll just hang around for a couple minutes, and if you guys have individual questions, you can come up and talk to me, but...
I have a question. So for LinkedIn, I know there's a spot for you to upload your resume, but since we're supposed to make tailored resumes for particular ones, what then do you upload a million in the resume?
So that's kind of like you have to think about it as if you're going to like a career fair or a networking event too. It's like you don't know who you're going to run into, so you almost have to frame it like, what do you want? In an ideal situation, what's your dream job? What are the skills and qualifications that are required for that dream job? And those are the ones that then you should highlight. So, because you can't cover every single job that's out there, and especially if there are different categories. So really pick the one that you love the most, or the one that you feel like can encompass, what you're really searching for, and tailor it to that. You're welcome. Mm-hmm.
Pardon me if you've addressed this already, but what about putting up in a general space like that, a more lengthy CV as opposed to a shorter resume? Yeah,
you can do that. Like with LinkedIn, there's so many, like you can tailor it however you want. There's recommendations that you can put in, and people can vouch for you for certain skills and accomplishments. And so, it's a personal preference. For example, some people don't even include, impact statements or bullet point statements. They just include where they've worked and, the dates that they were there. And it really is kind of like, how are you using LinkedIn? If you're using LinkedIn just as purely a networking tool, you're not really using it as a job searching thing, then doing those baseline, really brief, profiles is fine. Because really it is about mostly the name recognition of the company and how you're connected to it and how the other people are connected to it. If you're looking for a job, I would add more of that stuff. And it is, because it's online, LinkedIn is more forgiving of the more the better. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to CVs and stuff, CVs, those are for, academic research, positions where it's not a synopsis of the most relevant experience. More is more, with a CV. And so, applying to grad schools and doc programs, include everything for that. But for a resume, it's more of a synopsis of things.